The wind moved like a whisper across the red plains of Nkaru village, as dusk painted the skies in shades of fire and ash. And Ebony walked home with the burden of her grandmother's death heavy on her chest, her bare feet pressing softly into the warm earth while the drumbeats from the burial ground still echoed faintly behind her. The villagers had wailed and danced in mourning, yet beneath the sorrow there had been fear. For old Mama Ifunsidon had carried many secrets to her grave, and some whispered that she had not truly gone, that the earth itself might spit her spirit back. Ebony, clutching the small bundle of items left behind in her grandmother's hut, felt a strange coldness seep into her skin though the evening air was warm. And when she finally sat before the dim glow of the oil lamp in her home, she carefully unwrapped the bundle, finding cloths scented with herbs, cowrie shells strung into bracelets, a calabash stained with old palm wine, and at the very bottom, hidden within faded indigo cloth, a wooden comb carved with twisting ancestral patterns that seemed to writhe when the light flickered. She touched it, and the air shifted, carrying the faint sound of a woman laughing though she was alone, her breath catching as her reflection in the brass mirror seemed to shimmer. And for the briefest moment, another face older, sharper, yet eerily similar flashed across her own. Ebony dropped the comb in shock, but it did not clatter as expected, instead landing without a sound. And when she picked it up again, warmth spread into her fingers like blood returning to a long dead limb. Outside, the crickets hushed all at once as if the land itself held its breath. And Ebony whispered a prayer to the ancestors though her voice trembled, for she could feel the invisible threads of something far older than her weaving into her life. And she knew deep within that Mama Ifunsidon's death was not the end but the opening of a door that should have remained closed. And as the night deepened over Nkaru, the moon hung low like a pale eye watching from the heavens, its light slipping through the cracks of Ebony's small mud brick hut where shadows clung stubbornly to the corners. The comb lay on the woven mat before her, and though she had wrapped it again in her grandmother's indigo cloth, she could still feel its presence pulsing faintly as if it had a heartbeat of its own. And the laughter she had heard earlier now echoed faintly in her ears, low and mocking, curling around her thoughts until she pressed her hands to her head to drive it away. She tried to pray again, whispering the names of her ancestors, but her voice faltered when she glanced at the brass mirror. For the older woman's face had returned, more vivid this time, with eyes glistening like oil and lips curled into a knowing smile. Ebony's breath grew shallow as she watched the reflection move though she had not, the older face tilting its head slowly as if examining her. And then without sound the lips of the reflection shaped her name, Ebony. A whisper she felt more than heard. Panic surged in her chest, and she stumbled backward, knocking over the calabash which spilled its old wine onto the earthen floor, where it seeped into the soil like blood. Just then, the oil lamp flickered violently and died, plunging her into thick darkness. And outside, the howling of dogs rose, carried by the restless wind. Clutching the indigo cloth to her chest, Ebony ran barefoot to the doorway and stepped into the moonlight, where she found the village unusually silent, the drumbeats of morning gone, the air heavy with an unnatural stillness. And as her eyes adjusted, she saw a figure standing at the edge of the baobab grove, cloaked in shadow yet unmistakably shaped like her, same height, same build, the tilt of the shoulders identical, but its stance was too still, too deliberate, as if waiting. Fear clawed at her throat, and she called out softly, "Who is there?" But the figure did not answer, only lifting an arm in a slow, graceful motion that made her blood run cold. And as the moonlight shifted, she saw its face clearly. It was her own, but older, with the same sharpness she had glimpsed in the mirror. Ebony stumbled back, heart thundering, and the figure smiled with lips that were hers but not hers, before fading into the shadows of the baobabs as though the trees had swallowed it. Trembling, Ebony sank to her knees, clutching the cloth and whispering Mama Ifunsitan's name. But even as she prayed, she felt an unsettling truth gnaw at her spirit. The old woman's death had unleashed something bound to her bloodline, and now a stranger wore her face and walked in her place beneath the moon. And by the time the first rooster crowed in the pale dawn, Ebony had not closed her eyes, for she had remained crouched by the threshold of her hut, trembling in the night air and staring toward the baobab grove where the figure had vanished, her heart pounding as though it would tear from her chest. When the sun finally broke through the horizon, she rose stiffly and wrapped a shawl around her shoulders, deciding she could not bear the weight of the strange vision alone. So she hurried along the narrow red earth paths that wound between huts until she reached the compound of Baba Olufemi, the oldest elder in Karu and keeper of the ancestral lore, whose gray hair glistened with age and whose eyes carried the depth of centuries. She found him seated on a low wooden stool, grinding coal and nuts with slow, deliberate motions. And though he welcomed her kindly, his expression grew grave as she described the comb, the laughing voice, and the figure who wore her face beneath the moonlight. Baba Olufemi listened in silence, then closed his eyes and whispered a prayer in the old tongue before saying, "Child, your grandmother Ifunsitan meddled in powers that even the bravest spirits fear. The comb you now hold is not a trinket. It is a vessel of stolen life, passed from ancestor to ancestor in secret, feeding on the youth of her own blood. It is said that whoever holds it risks becoming a door for the one who first carved it, a woman cursed by the gods for her greed of eternal beauty." Ebony felt her skin crawl as the words sank in, and she asked what she must do, her voice barely more than a whisper. But Baba Olufemi only shook his head, saying that once the spirit takes notice, it never lets go. Still, he told her to seek the shrine of the river goddess Oshunlaid beyond the forest, for only water spirits had the power to cleanse the stain of such a curse. Though the journey was dangerous, and not all who went returned, Ebony nodded, though her body trembled, and as she prepared to leave, the elder pressed a string of cowries into her palm, telling her to wear it close, for the ancestors might show her mercy if she proved her courage. As she stepped away, a soft voice brushed her ear though no one was behind her, and it was her own voice, calm and chilling. "Why run from yourself, Ebony?" She froze, clutching the cowries tight, and when she turned back, Baba Olufemi's face was pale, for he had heard it though his lips did not move. The old man urged her to leave at once, warning that the stranger had already begun to walk in her place, and if she delayed, she might return home one day to find the village no longer recognized her. And Ebony set out toward the forest with the weight of Baba Olufemi's warning pressing heavily against her chest, the morning sun casting long golden rays across the village as she passed neighbors who greeted her with puzzled glances, for her eyes seemed restless and her spirit unsettled. She clutched the string of cowries tightly, feeling their cool surface against her palm, and the indigo cloth with the comb hidden inside lay secured within the fold of her wrapper, as though it burned against her skin despite the morning's warmth. The forest loomed ahead, its thick canopy of ancient trees whispering with secrets older than the village itself. And as she entered the shaded path, the air grew damp and heavy, filled with the scent of earth and river moss, the sound of distant water echoing like a hidden heartbeat. Every step seemed to draw her deeper into silence, broken only by the occasional cry of a bird. Yet even those cries sounded strange, as though warning her to turn back. She remembered Baba Alafemi's words about the river goddess Oceanlade, and though her faith wavered, she whispered prayers to her ancestors, begging them to walk beside her. After a while, she came upon a clearing where an ancient Iroko tree rose tall, its roots coiling out of the ground like serpents, and there she paused to rest. But as she leaned against the rough bark, she felt a shiver run through her body, for carved faintly into the trunk were symbols that matched the patterns on the comb, their spirals twisting as if alive. Startled, she pulled back, only to see her own reflection shimmering on the tree's surface, though no water was near, and in that reflection stood not the tired young woman she knew herself to be, but the older face again, now smiling with cruel delight. Her breath caught as the reflection raised a hand in unison with her, but when she lowered hers, the reflection kept its raised, fingers stretching unnaturally long like roots seeking the soil. Panicked, Abeni stumbled away from the tree, clutching the cowries for strength, and as she ran, she heard footsteps behind her though she dared not look. The sound of bare feet padding softly yet steadily on the forest floor, chasing her shadow for every step she took. Finally, she reached the sound of rushing water, and before her spread the glittering river, wide and gleaming beneath the sunlight, its surface rippling with golden light that seemed almost to breathe. Relief washed over her, yet as she stepped closer, she froze. For on the opposite bank stood the same figure again, her face, her body, her stance watching in silence with eyes that glowed faintly, like embers, and though no words were spoken, Abeni felt the message echo inside her bones. The river will not wash me away, for I am you. And as Abeni stood frozen at the river bank, the air grew colder though the sun burned high above, and the waters before her rippled in patterns that seemed to form symbols she could not understand. She clutched the cowries tightly against her chest, whispering prayers to Oceanlade. But the figure across the water only smiled faintly, its lips curving in a way that mocked her fear. Suddenly the river stirred as if alive, and from its depths rose a voice soft yet commanding, the kind that carried both comfort and warning, saying, "Child of Ifunsidon, why do you bring the comb to my waters?" Abeni's knees weakened as she fell to the ground in reverence, for she knew it could only be the river goddess herself. Yet before she could answer, the double across the bank spoke in her exact voice, saying, "It is I, Abeni, who comes seeking your blessing." And the words chilled her blood, for though the sound was hers, the tone carried an ancient weight she could never command. The river shimmered and the surface parted slightly, revealing the faint outline of a woman woven from liquid gold, her eyes flowing like streams, her hair a cascade of rushing waters. And Abeni realized Oceanlade had truly come. But as the goddess gazed at the two figures, her brow furrowed, and she said, "Two faces, one spirit yet one reeks of theft and hunger." Abeni cried out, clutching the indigo cloth and begging, "Great Mother, I am the true one. I am the granddaughter of Ifunsidon. I seek only to break what she has bound upon me." The double only laughed softly and stepped forward onto the surface of the water, as though it were solid ground, her glowing eyes fixed on Abeni as she said, "She lies. River Mother, she clings to youth that is not hers. It is I who have been imprisoned, while she walks free." Oceanlade's waters churned, sending sprays high into the air, and the goddess lifted a hand, silencing both voices. "The comb is a vessel of greed," she said, her voice rolling like thunder beneath calm waves, "and its curse feeds upon the blood of your line. To cleanse it requires sacrifice, for stolen time must be returned." Abeni's heart pounded as she asked what sacrifice was needed, but Oceanlade's gaze drifted to the comb hidden in her cloth, and the goddess whispered, You already know, child, though your heart resists it. Before a Benny could respond, the double leapt closer across the water, her face shifting from older to younger, and back again in a dizzying flicker. And as she reached the bank, her hand shot out, fingers stretching toward a Benny's throat. But the goddess's waters surged upward, forming a barrier of gold that forced the double back. Oshunlade's voice boomed, "Decide quickly, for the shadow grows stronger with every breath. Choose to release the comb's hunger, or be devoured by yourself." And Benny's body trembled as the golden barrier of water rippled before her, the voice of Oshunlade still echoing in her ears like a song that threatened to split her heart in two. The double had retreated slightly, its ember-bright eyes narrowing with fury as though the goddess's intervention had wounded it. But even in its rage it smiled, a cruel and patient smile that promised it would return. Oshunlade's watery form leaned closer, her face radiant yet solemn, and she said, "The comb is not merely wood. Child, it is a vessel carved from the Iroko tree where your ancestor first bargained with forbidden spirits. It feeds on the years of her bloodline, preserving her beauty at the price of her children's youth. And now it seeks to finish its hunger through you." Benny's throat tightened as she thought of her younger cousins, her nieces and nephews, all the children of Nkaru whose laughter echoed through the village if the curse grew stronger. It would devour them all, leaving only shadows in their place. She asked the goddess what sacrifice she must give, but Oshunlade's eyes, deep as rivers, only glistened with sorrow as she answered, "To cleanse the comb, you must surrender that which it stole your youth, your strength, your days." Benny gasped, clutching the cowries tighter, for she was barely 20 seasons old. Her whole life stretched before her like the red road to the horizon. Yet the thought of dooming her kin chilled her more than death itself. The double's laughter rang out suddenly, harsh and echoing, and it said, "Do not listen to her. Benny, she would see you withered and wasted. While I can give you eternity, let me in, and together we will walk this earth without end." Benny shook her head fiercely, yet doubt gnawed at her, for she could still feel the warmth of the comb pulsing against her ribs, tempting her with the promise of beauty untouched by age. Oshunlade's form began to waver, the golden light dimming as if the curse was pushing back even against the goddess's power. And she warned, "Decide before the sun crosses the sky's middle, or the shadow will claim you wholly." Tears burned Benny's eyes as she looked from the shining river to her grinning double, and she whispered, "Ancestors, guide me," though her voice cracked under the weight of fear. The double tilted its head mockingly, then stepped backward into the shadows of the forest, leaving Benny alone with the fading light of the goddess, who softly said, "Seek the shrine stone deeper in the forest, and there you will face the truth of sacrifice. Only then will your choice bind forever." With that, the golden waters sank back into the river, leaving the air strangely silent except for the pounding of Benny's heart, as she realized her path was set, and the forest itself seemed to lean closer, waiting for her next step. With Oshunlade's light gone, the forest grew darker even though the sun still hung above, its rays unable to pierce the thick canopy, as though the trees themselves sought to hide the path ahead. Benny's bare feet pressed into the cool red earth as she forced herself forward, clutching the string of cowries that now felt warmer, pulsing faintly as though alive, guiding her deeper into the woods where the air grew dense with the scent of damp leaves and old secrets. The words of the goddess echoed in her mind, "Seek the shrine stone deeper in the forest." And though fear gnawed at her, she knew turning back meant the shadow would soon wear her skin without resistance. As she walked, the silence pressed against her ears until she could hear the thudding of her own heart louder than the forest itself. And then, Faintly, she heard the sound of drums, distant but steady, the kind used only in rituals of great importance, their rhythm summoning her to quicken her steps. Following the sound, she came upon a narrow clearing where shafts of sunlight pierced the canopy in golden streaks, falling upon a massive stone covered in white chalk symbols that spiraled outward. Like waves, the shrine stone Baba Olufemi had once described in his stories, said to be older than the village itself. She fell to her knees before it, placing the cowries at its base, and whispered prayers to her ancestors, her voice trembling as she asked for strength. But as her hands touched the stone, the air shifted, and she was no longer in the forest, but standing in a vast plain of swirling mist, the sky above painted in hues of crimson and indigo, and before her stood figures cloaked in shadows, yet glowing faintly with the light of ancestral fire. One stepped forward, a woman tall and regal, her eyes fierce and sorrowful, and Ebony knew at once it was Ifunsiten, her grandmother. Though she looked neither old nor young but suspended in ageless beauty, Ifunsiten's voice cut through the mist, strong and commanding, saying, "Child, you carry what was mine. Why do you seek to throw away the gift I gave our bloodline?" Ebony's throat tightened, and she answered that it was no gift but a curse, stealing life from her kin. But Ifunsiten only shook her head with a smile both tender and chilling, saying, "The world honors strength, not weakness. Through this comb, we may never fade. Is that not worth the price of a few fleeting years from others?" The mist swirled, and behind Ifunsiten appeared the shadow double, its face shifting closer to Ebony's own, whispering, "See, even she knows except me, and you will never break, never wither, never be forgotten." Torn between the weight of her grandmother's legacy and the memory of Oshunlade's warning, Ebony pressed her hand to her chest and cried, "Ancestors, I will not be your prison. I will not live on stolen days." And as her voice echoed in the mist, the shrine stone beneath her hands burned hot, pulsing like a beating heart as though awaiting her choice. The shrine stone throbbed under Ebony's palms like the heart of something alive, the heat spreading up her arms until her whole body seemed to pulse with it. While the mist plain thickened around her, shadows stretching tall and bending like trees in a storm, Ifunsiten's regal form stepped closer, her eyes glowing faintly with a golden fire, and she said, "You speak of prison, yet you do not understand what it means to fade into dust while the world forgets your name. I chose endurance. I carved our place in eternity, and you would shatter it out of fear." Ebony trembled but held her ground, replying that eternity was not worth the laughter of children stolen, or the strength of the young drained into silence. But Ifunsiten's smile faltered only briefly before hardening again, her voice low as she whispered, "You think you are different from me, but the hunger is already in you, child. It sings in your blood each time you dream of more than this village can give. Why else do you carry the comb so close to your skin?" And at her words, the shadow double laughed softly, circling Ebony like a predator, its ember-like eyes burning brighter as it said, "She knows the truth, little one. You crave as much as she once did. Let me in, and together we will drink from the river of unending days." Ebony's breath came heavy, for deep within, she could feel the pull, the dangerous longing for the life her grandmother promised: power, beauty, and a name etched forever in the memory of the world. Yet she forced herself to recall Baba Olufemi's face, the kindness of her mother, the innocent laughter of the children, and the warmth of her people's songs by the fire. And with that memory she pressed the cowries harder against the stone, until their shells cracked faintly, their fragments glowing white as if awakening the spirits that watched. Suddenly the mist roared, and dozens of ancestral figures stepped forth, their faces solemn yet filled with sorrow. their voices overlapping in a chorus that shook the plane, saying, "Balance must be restored, a life for a life, youth for youth. The comb cannot remain unclaimed." Ifunsitan turned to them, her face filled with fury, and she cried, "You bound me to this fate, and now you would let her undo it." But the ancestors only raised their hands in silence, their fire growing brighter until even Ifunsitan's figure wavered like smoke in wind. The shadow double lunged toward Ebony, its form blurring into something less human, a mass of writhing darkness shaped by her own face. But before it could touch her, the shrine stone blazed with a sudden burst of light that threw the figure backward. Ebony gasped as the light seared her eyes, and she heard the ancestors' voices whisper in her ear, "Choose now. Child of Ifunsitan, will you return the stolen days, or will you keep the hunger alive?" As the blazing light from the shrine stone dimmed to a steady glow, Ebony felt her body weaken, as though the ancestors' voices had pulled threads of her spirit loose, leaving her trembling on her knees while the mist plane tremored with unseen power. The shadow double, though flung back, began to rise again, its form shifting rapidly from her likeness to that of an old woman's, then back to hers. The change is more violent now, as if it could not hold its stolen shape. Ifunsitan's figure flickered too, her regal calm breaking into flashes of desperation as she extended her hand toward Ebony, saying, "Do not be deceived, child. They speak of balance but know nothing of the hunger that waits when you are gone. Accept me, and we can silence them all. You will never feel weakness again." Ebony's eyes stung with tears, and her voice shook as she answered, "But at what cost, grandmother? The laughter of my kin, the years of those unborn." Her words carried into the mist, and the ancestors' chorus swelled, their tone heavy with finality as they declared, "The shrine stone demands a tether to end the hunger. The comb must be given, and with it, the years it has stolen." The comb grew hotter within the folds of her indigo cloth, almost burning, and Ebony understood then that she could not simply return it. She would have to give of herself, to pour her own youth into its wood until the hunger stilled. Fear coiled in her belly like a serpent, but when she thought of the children of Nkaru running barefoot through the dust, their joy lighting the air like fireflies, she knew she could not let them vanish into shadow. She lifted the comb slowly, its teeth glinting faintly as though dripping with invisible years, and whispered a prayer to the ancestors for courage. The shadow double screamed, rushing toward her with claws of black smoke, but the ancestors raised their arms, forming a barrier of fire that held it at bay, their eyes never leaving Ebony as they urged her onward. Her grandmother cried out her name then, a cry filled with both command and terror, and Ebony felt her resolve falter as her body ached with the weight of the choice. For part of her longed to turn away, to embrace the promise of unending days. Yet the voices of the ancestors pressed upon her, fierce and insistent, until she knew there was no escaping what was required. With trembling hands, she held the comb over the shrine stone, the air thickening until it felt hard to breathe, and the glow from the stone surged up, wrapping around her fingers like molten gold, waiting for her final decision. As Ebony held the cursed comb above the shrine stone, the glow from its polished teeth ignited into a brilliance so fierce it lit the mist plain like a rising sun, and the heat seared her palms until she almost dropped it. But the voices of the ancestors thundered, "Hold, child of Ifunsitan, for the balance awaits." The shadow double screeched in rage, hurling itself against the circle of ancestral fire, its form contorting into twisted parodies of Ebony's own face, smiling, weeping, and glaring in hatred, yet it could not breach the wall. And Ebony understood that for the first time, it was afraid. The comb pulsed like a living heart, pulling at her very breath, and she felt her youth begin to unravel, strands of time slipping from her skin like threads of silk, her body trembling as the shrine stone absorbed them, glowing brighter with every heartbeat. Her knees buckled under the weight of it, and her vision blurred until the faces of the ancestors swirled together in a storm of firelit eyes. But still she clung to the comb, whispering through clenched teeth, "Take from me, but let them live." She thought of her younger cousins, her mother bending over the yam mounds in the fields, the children who chased each other in the dusk with laughter bright as drums, and she poured their memory into the act of sacrifice. Ifunsitten's figure lurched forward, her eyes blazing with fury, and she cried, "Foolish child, do you think they will remember you when you are nothing but ash? You could be eternal, and yet you choose decay." Her words stabbed at Ebony's heart, but even as her limbs weakened, she answered, "Better to be a memory that blesses than a shadow that curses." At those words, the shrine stone flared with a blinding light, the cowries shattered into glowing dust, and the air shook with a thunderous roar as the comb drank the last of her strength. The shadow double screamed as cracks of light split its body, spilling radiance through its smoky form, and it writhed in agony, its ember eyes dimming until they flickered like dying coals. Ebony collapsed onto the stone, her body frail, her skin pale as though years had passed in an instant, yet her heart still beat with quiet defiance. The ancestors' chorus softened, no longer thunder but a gentle murmur, their voices like wind through tall grass, whispering, "The path is not yet complete, child, but the curse is weakened. Rise and face what remains." With the last of her strength, Ebony lifted her head, her breath ragged but her spirit unbroken, as the mist plain dissolved back into the forest. The shrine stone now etched with fresh glowing symbols that pulsed in rhythm with her own weakened heartbeat, and as the forest replaced the mist plain, Ebony lay upon the shrine stone, her body trembling and her breath shallow, feeling as though time itself had slipped through her fingers and left her brittle. Yet the cowries' glowing dust lingered around her like fireflies, settling softly upon her skin as if to remind her she was not abandoned. The shrine stone pulsed faintly, its chalk-white symbols now burning gold. But when she looked around, expecting peace, the shadows of the forest still moved unnaturally, bending against the direction of the sunlight, and a deep, low hum rumbled beneath the earth as though something vast and unfinished stirred below. Ebony clutched the comb, now blackened and cracked, yet it still throbbed faintly as if alive. And the truth sank heavy in her chest. The curse had weakened but not died. The shadow double had shattered, but fragments of its smoke clung to the roots of the trees, whispering faintly in voices too low to understand. And her grandmother's form flickered briefly among the shadows, her eyes sharp with both fury and despair before vanishing once more. She struggled to her feet, her legs barely able to hold her, but she knew the ancestors had not lied when they told her the path was not yet complete. And she whispered aloud, "What more must I give?" Though no answer came, only the continued rumble of the earth. Forcing herself to step forward, she left the clearing, following the faint warmth that lingered in the cowrie's dust upon her skin. And as she moved deeper into the forest, she found the trees growing thicker, their roots knotted like veins, the air dense with a sweetness that clung to her tongue like honey but carried an undertone of rot. Soon, she stumbled upon a stream that ran red as though dyed with hibiscus, its waters reflecting not her face but that of the shadow double, smiling with a mouth full of teeth to sharp. And though its form was broken, its eyes glowed faintly, whispering, "I will return, for you cannot destroy what you carry within. You can only delay me." Ebony's heart pounded, and she backed away, Clutching the comb tighter, though its heat now burned like fire, she thought of going back to Baba Olufemi, for only his wisdom might untangle the remnants of this curse. And so she turned toward the path that led out of the forest, her breath rasping as she forced her body onward, the ground trembling with every step as though warning her that time was running short. Above her, a flock of blackbirds burst from the canopy, their wings blotting out the sun, and their cries echoed like 1,000 voices calling her name. And she knew then that her journey had only begun. Ebony staggered back into Nkaru just as the sun tilted toward its setting, the red light bathing the mud huts and yam fields in a glow that should have been warm, but instead felt heavy, as though the land itself was holding its breath. Villagers paused their evening chores to watch her, their whispers rising like rustling grass, for she looked not as she had when she left that morning, her youthful face now etched with fine lines, her eyes shadowed with exhaustion, her movements slow as an elder's. Some children clutched their mother's wrappers, frightened by the change, while others stared in silent wonder as if sensing the battle she had endured. Ebony ignored their murmurs and pressed on toward Baba Olufemi's hut, her feet dragging through the dust until at last she reached the doorway where the old seer awaited, his eyes glinting like dark pools that had seen far beyond the veil of time. Without a word, he beckoned her inside, and the air within the hut was thick with the smell of burning sage and kola nut. The walls lined with cowrie-strung charms and carved masks whose hollow eyes seemed to follow her every step. She laid the cracked comb before him, her hands trembling, and whispered, "It is not finished. I gave of myself, yet it still breathes." Baba Olufemi studied the comb, his wrinkled fingers tracing the cracks that pulsed faintly with a sickly light. And after a long silence he said, "You have weakened the hunger, child, but such a curse cannot be broken with one act. Your grandmother's spirit bound it too deeply, weaving it not only into her life but into the bloodline itself. To end it fully, the comb must drink from the one who cast it, or it will continue to feed on her descendants until the line withers." Ebony's heart clenched as she asked how, for Eve Funsiton had already passed from the living. But the seer's gaze did not waver as he replied, "The dead are not beyond reach. You must walk into the river of between, where the living and the dead meet in whispers. There you will confront her, not as shadow but as spirit. And only then can the comb be sated. But know this, Ebony, you will not leave unchanged, for the river asks for a toll." At those words, the walls of the hut seemed to bend inward, the carved masks grinning wider as though mocking her fate, and Ebony felt a chill creep through her bones. Yet even as fear coiled inside her, she nodded, for she could not allow her people to suffer further. Baba Olufemi handed her a calabash filled with bitter water and said softly, "Drink when the moon rises, and the river will open. May your spirit be strong enough to withstand its call." That night, as the full moon rose like a pale drum in the sky, Ebony sat alone on the edge of the village, the calabash cradled in her hands, its surface cool and smooth, though it seemed to throb faintly as though something inside yearned for release. The village fires burned behind her, laughter and song rising faintly from the yam feast she could not join, for her path no longer ran with theirs. And so she turned her face to the forest, whispering a prayer to the ancestors before lifting the bitter liquid to her lips. The taste was sharp, sour as tamarind and heavy as iron, and as it slid down her throat, her body shivered violently, her heartbeat slowing until it no longer matched the rhythm of the living world. The air grew thick, the crickets silenced, and the ground beneath her softened as if turning to wet clay, pulling her downward until her vision was swallowed by a deep, swirling darkness. When her eyes opened again, She stood upon the banks of the river of Between, a vast silver expanse, stretching endlessly under a sky that held no sun and no stars, only a cold glow that seemed to come from the water itself. The river flowed silently, though within its currents moved shapes of people, some familiar, some unknown, faces of ancestors and strangers drifting together like shadows caught in moonlight. And their murmurs brushed her ears like the rustling of palm leaves, words too faint to grasp yet heavy with sorrow. Clutching the cracked comb to her chest, she stepped forward, the sand cool beneath her bare feet, and the water lapped at the edges as though beckoning her in. Across the river, she saw her grandmother, Impostor, standing tall and radiant, her skin smooth and her eyes bright. No longer the withered elder she had been in life, but the form of a woman in her prime, draped in flowing indigo wrappers that shimmered like the night sky, her face both beautiful and terrible, for it bore the smile of one who had tasted forbidden power. Benny's chest tightened, but she forced herself to call out, "Grandmother, the curse must end. You cannot bind us forever." Impostor's laughter drifted across the water, sweet as cola and sharp as a blade, and she replied, "Child, you speak of ending what gives us strength. Without this, our line is nothing. I have given you the face of eternity, and you would cast it away?" The river surged between them, its silver currents rising higher as if feeding on their conflict, and Benny felt the comb grow hot in her hand, its cracks glowing brighter. Whispering hungrily for the spirit it had been denied, summoning her courage, she stepped into the water, the cold piercing through her skin into her bones. And though every instinct urged her to turn back, she pressed on, her eyes locked on the woman who had stolen from her bloodline, knowing that this crossing would decide not only her fate but the fate of all her descendants. As Benny pushed deeper into the river of Between, the cold cut into her flesh like shards of obsidian. Yet her eyes did not waver from the figure of Impostor standing proudly on the opposite bank, her beauty glowing in defiance of death, her voice carrying over the water like the echo of a drumbeat. "You are bold, child, to come where even the bravest fear to tread. Tell me, what gives you the right to demand the end of what has sustained us?" Benny's lips trembled, but her voice rose firm. "It is not sustenance, grandmother. It is theft. The faces of your daughters and granddaughters have withered, so you might remain eternal, and I will not allow the comb to drink from us again." Impostor's laughter rang out, beautiful yet chilling, and the river's silver waters rippled as though stirred by her amusement, the drifting faces of the ancestors turning to watch with hollow eyes, their whispers growing louder, carrying fragments of warnings and prayers that tangled in Benny's ears. The comb in her hand pulsed hotter, its cracks spilling thin streams of light into the water, as if eager to devour the spirits standing before her. And Benny felt her strength falter under its burning hunger, but she gritted her teeth and stepped forward again, the water rising to her waist. Clutching the comb tightly though it scorched her palm, Impostor's face darkened, the warmth of her smile fading into a sharp glare, and she said, "You speak of ending the curse, but you do not yet understand it. This comb does not only take youth, it carries the memories, the strength, the spirit of those it touches. Without it, our bloodline is nothing more than dust on the harmattan wind." "You would trade power for frailty?" Benny's heart clenched, for she felt the truth in the weight of her words. Yet she also saw the shadows of the women who had come before her, their faces etched with suffering, their spirits drained to feed the comb's hunger. And she cried out, "If power demands the death of my sisters, then I choose frailty, for I will not live on the stolen breath of those I love." At her words, the river surged violently, the currents pulling at her legs as though to drag her under. and the sky above the river of between trembled with a sound like distant drums. While Ifunsiden's form flickered, her beauty warping into a visage older than time, her voice breaking into a shriek that carried both rage and sorrow. The ancestors' whispers swelled into a chant, their voices rising in unison as if urging Ebony forward. And though her limbs burned with cold and exhaustion, she pushed through the current until she stood only a few strides away from the woman who had cursed them all. The comb glowing so brightly now it lit the river in blinding silver, and for the first time, fear flickered in Ifunsiden's eyes. As Ebony drew closer, the river of between thrashed wildly, its waves rising like the arms of spirits reaching to claim her. Yet she pressed on, her feet sinking into the silver water as the comb burned hotter in her grip, its light spilling out like a small sun, illuminating the ancestral faces drifting within the current, their hollow eyes watching the confrontation with a silence that carried judgment. Ifunsiden's visage shifted again, her beauty unraveling like old cloth, her skin flickering between the smooth glow of youth and the wrinkled creases of age, her voice now carrying the hiss of a serpent. "You foolish girl, do you not see? This comb is not a curse, it is a covenant. It is the bond between us and the power that keeps our name alive. The reason we are remembered while others are forgotten. Do not fight me, join me, and I will show you how to bend the river to your will." The river's water coiled upward, forming glistening tendrils that reached for Ebony, wrapping around her arms and waist, pulling her closer to the figure on the far bank. And the comb trembled in her hand as if struggling to decide between master and servant. Ebony cried out in pain, the icy tendrils burning her skin like fire. But deep within, she felt the rhythm of the ancestors' chant vibrating through her bones, their voices growing stronger, urging her not to yield, and summoning all her will. She raised the comb high above her head, the cracks blazing brighter, shouting, "I will not be your shadow, grandmother, I am my own." The chant swelled in response, and the spirits within the river surged, their faces twisting as they pushed against the current, breaking apart the tendrils that bound her, their hollow eyes now glowing faintly with approval. Ifunsiden shrieked, her form rippling violently, her body elongating into a towering figure cloaked in shadow, her hair whipping like serpents in the unseen wind, and the very river buckled under her rage, waves crashing over Ebony's shoulders, as if to drown her. Yet she gripped the comb tighter, forcing it forward as its light expanded, striking the shadowed figure with a searing glow. The impact sent a ripple through the entire river, and the ancestors cried out in unison, some with pain, others with release, as Ifunsiden staggered, her eyes burning with fury, hissing, "You dare take from me what I have claimed for centuries." And in that moment, Ebony realized the battle was no longer about the comb alone, but about the very soul of their bloodline, and that her strength would be measured not by her defiance, but by her willingness to endure the toll the river demanded. As the river trembled beneath the clash of light and shadow, the currents suddenly shifted, their silver glow turning murky, swirling into shapes that rose before Ebony's eyes. And she realized with a jolt that the river of between was no longer simply water, it had become a mirror of her spirit, testing her resolve with illusions drawn from her deepest fears. The first vision was her mother, Alaba, standing waist deep in the current, her face streaked with tears, her voice trembling as she said, "My daughter, why do you fight what has always been our way? Without this comb, we are nothing, do you? Wish me to grow old and forgotten, to fade before your eyes?" Ebony's heart wrenched, for the woman before her looked so real that the comb shook in her hand. Yet when she reached out, the figure's reflection rippled, revealing empty sockets where eyes should have been. And she remembered the whispers of the ancestors, steadying herself as she answered firmly, "You are not my mother. You are the river's lie." The vision dissolved into mist, but immediately, another emerged, her younger brother, Kunnel, his small hands clutching her wrapper, his voice pleading, "Benny, don't leave me alone. If you break the comb, the spirits will take me, and I will vanish." Her throat tightened, for the fear in his voice was the same as when thunder cracked across their compound during the rains. But she forced her gaze on the glowing comb, whispering through clenched teeth, "You will not vanish, Kunnel. This curse will not claim you." The boy's form shrieked and melted into the current, his face twisting into a hollow-eyed mask before sinking beneath the water. And the river grew wilder, as though enraged by her defiance. Then came the third vision, the most painful of all, herself, standing across the river, draped in shining wrappers, her skin flawless, her face radiant, her voice calm and alluring. "Why fight when you could be me, eternal, beautiful, worshipped? All it takes is surrender, and the comb will make you queen of every generation." Benny's breath caught, for she had long dreamed of escaping the shadow of struggle, of being more than a girl burdened by tales of curses and debts to the dead. And for one fragile moment she imagined how it would feel to never grow weak, to never know fear again. But then she looked at the reflection's eyes too bright, too hungry, and she felt the pulse of the comb in her palm, not as temptation, but as a plea, as if the object itself longed to be freed of the dark bargain it carried. And with sudden fierceness she shouted, "I will not wear a stolen face." The vision screamed and shattered into shards of silver light that rained back into the water. And the river itself roared, the ancestral chant now louder, stronger, as though her rejection of the illusions had fed their strength. While on the far bank, Ifunsitan staggered, her shadowed form flickering with rage and fear, her voice shaking as she hissed, "The river may favor you, child, but you will not survive what comes next." And as the river settled into a heavy, expectant silence after the illusions dissolved, Benny felt the comb's glow shift, no longer searing with defiance but pulsing with a rhythm that matched the steady thrum of her heart. And then the current before her opened like a curtain, revealing a procession of figures draped in raffia and cowrie shells, their faces obscured by masks carved from ancient Iroko wood, each one carrying the weight of centuries. The tallest among them stepped forward, his mask painted in swirls of red and white, his voice resonant though his lips did not move. "Child of the line of Ifunsitan, you seek to end what was begun. Before your first breath, you must know the truth before you choose." The river shimmered, and suddenly Benny was standing not in water but in a clearing beneath a vast baobab tree, whose roots wrapped around forgotten bones. And before her played a vision of long ago, a young woman, her beauty radiant, kneeling before a shrine of iron and stone, holding the very comb Benny now gripped, her voice crying to the Orisa, "Grant me youth eternal, let me never wither. Let my children bear my years so I may reign." The ground shook as shadows coiled around the comb, binding it with power. And Benny realized the woman was Ifunsitan herself, desperate and trembling, her ambition louder than her fear. The masked figure's voice continued, "The comb was forged not of iron, but of sacrifice. Each strand of youth stolen was woven into it by the river's spirits, and each generation since has paid the price, their faces taken, their years devoured, so the first bearer might walk unbroken through time." Benny's breath caught as she saw countless descendants withering too soon, their eyes dull as their beauty was pulled from them, feeding the woman who laughed with skin unchanging. Tears stung her eyes as she whispered, "So it was never a blessing, it was a theft." And the ancestor's mask tilted solemnly, "A theft and a covenant." As long as the comb endures, so does her claim. Destroy it, and the bond is broken. But know this, child, the river demands balance. What is unraveled must be mended, and the one who breaks the comb must bear the wound of its undoing. The vision dissolved, and Ebony was again waist deep in the river, the comb hot in her hand, its light now softer, as if it awaited her decision. While on the far bank Ifunsidon laughed bitterly, her voice carrying over the water. Do you see now, little one? If you break it, the river will not spare you. You will carry the burden, you will pay the debt, and you will beg for what I offered freely. The ancestral chant rose, neither urging nor restraining her, but watching, weighing her heart, as the river churned once more, daring her to choose between her family's freedom and her own survival. As the ancestral chant faded into the murmur of the restless river, Ebony stood trembling, the comb burning like living fire in her palm, and she turned her gaze toward Ifunsidon, who still lingered on the far bank, her shadow-wrapped figure flickering like smoke caught between worlds, her eyes gleaming with the hunger of centuries. The girl raised her chin, her voice steady though her heart pounded. You chained your own blood to this river so you could remain young, but I will not allow your curse to swallow us anymore. At her words, Ifunsidon's laughter rang sharp, carrying the bitterness of someone who had bargained too deeply with spirits. Do you think your resolve is enough, child? You think truth makes you strong. The river does not care for truth. It cares for balance, and balance demands blood. As she spoke, the water surged violently, and from its depths rose hands made of churning current, grasping at Ebony's waist. Cold as death, she gasped, nearly dropping the comb, but clutched it tighter, forcing her spirit to stand firm. As the ancestors' masked forms reappeared in the mist above the water, their voices blending like 1,000 drums. If you would break the covenant, you must give what was stolen back. Ebony's breath caught, for she understood then what they meant. Youth and years could not vanish into nothing. They had to return, and the river demanded she be the vessel to bear the pain of generations. Fear sliced through her chest, but then she remembered Cunnel's laughter, her mother's gentle songs while weaving baskets, the warmth of her people gathered under moonlight, and she whispered, if I must bear the weight so they may live, then I accept. The comb pulsed as though alive, and Ifunsidon shrieked, lunging forward with unnatural speed. Her arms stretched like shadows trying to wrench the comb away, but the river itself rose between them, a wall of silver light holding the elder woman back. Her form cracked and splintered as she screamed, you cannot undo me, I am eternal. But the ancestors' chant grew louder, drowning her voice, until even the shadows around her began to wither. The comb in Ebony's hand grew unbearably hot, searing into her skin, and a blinding pain shot through her body, stealing her breath as the years of her foremothers poured into her veins like molten fire. Her back bending, her skin wrinkling, her bones aching as if she had lived 100 lives in one breath. Yet she clung to her choice, her tears falling into the river as it roared around her. Above her, the masked ancestor lowered his staff, his voice carrying both sorrow and pride. The debt is being paid. And as Ifunsidon screamed in fury, her once youthful form unraveling into dust that scattered across the river, Ebony knew she had crossed the threshold into a destiny from which there was no return. As the river's fury quieted into a trembling calm, Ebony collapsed to her knees in the shallow water, her body trembling under the weight of countless lifetimes now lodged within her bones, her hands shaking as she still clutched the comb, its once blazing light now dimmed to a dull ember as if drained of its strength. The ancestors' masks faded back into the mist, leaving her alone beneath the heavy silence of the night. save for the ragged sound of her own breathing. And when she finally lifted her gaze, the far bank where Ifunsidin had stood was empty, only a scattering of withered leaves marking the place where the once youthful woman had disintegrated, her laughter echoing faintly like a curse carried by the wind. Ebony tried to stand, but her legs buckled, her joints aching as though a century weighed upon them. And she realized with horror that her reflection in the river no longer showed the smooth face of a girl but the lined, weathered features of a woman twice her age. Panic surged through her, but then she felt a warmth in her chest, and the vision of her mother and brother smiling beneath the morning sun filled her mind, reminding her why she had chosen this path. For the curse had been broken, and her people would be free. The forest around her seemed to exhale, the shadows retreating, the drums of the river fading into the chirp of night insects. Yet the air still carried the solemn hush of spirits lingering just beyond sight. Slowly, she forced herself to rise, leaning on a branch that had drifted ashore, and made her way back toward the village, each step heavier than the last, though a strange lightness filled her heart. When she emerged from the trees, she found the village bathed in moonlight, the fires of the evening dance still smoldering, and as her people turned to see her, a ripple of shock ran through them. For though her eyes were still the eyes of Ebony, her face and body bore the marks of an elder. Her hair streaked with silver as though she had aged decades in a single night. Whispers rose among the villagers, and little Cunnel broke from the crowd, running to her with tears streaming. "Sister, what happened to you?" She knelt to hold him, her frail arms trembling but her spirit firm. "I gave what was needed so you may live free," she whispered, and as her mother approached, tears glistening in her eyes, she laid a hand on Ebony's cheek, recognizing the sacrifice though words failed her. Behind them, the elders exchanged wary glances, for they knew that no one could defy the river's covenant without leaving a mark. And though Ifunsidin's reign of stolen youth was ended, they feared what new bond the girl had forged in her place, for the river always remembers its debts. That night, as the moon cast its pale light over the village, the elders summoned Ebony to the great hut where the council fire still smoldered, the air thick with the scent of burning cola and bitter herbs meant to ward off wandering spirits. She entered slowly, her frail body draped in a wrapper too loose for her now. The carved staff she leaned on clicking softly against the clay floor as the elders alike, Ogunlana and Mama Yetund, watched her with eyes heavy with both gratitude and fear. They seated her near the fire, their wrinkled faces reflecting its glow, and for a long while, none spoke, the silence broken only by the crackling of wood, until finally Mama Yetund, the oldest of them, lifted her cowrie-adorned hand and said, "Child, your sacrifice has freed us from Ifunsidin's shadow, but I see in your face that the river has not let you go. What bargain have you struck?" Ebony's voice, though weakened, carried a strength that silenced even the night insects outside. "No bargain. I gave myself so that the curse may end. But the ancestors said the debt was being paid, yet I feel it still pulling inside me, like a thread not fully severed." The elders exchanged uneasy glances, and Ogunlana, whose deep voice always carried the weight of judgment, muttered, "The river never accepts half a payment. If it took her youth, it will want her spirit too." Ebony clenched the comb in her lap, its dull glow faintly pulsing, and she told them how the ancestors had demanded she carry the years stolen, how Ifunsidin had withered into dust, and how she feared her body would not hold under the weight for long. Alake leaned forward, his beaded necklace swaying. "The comb remains, that is no small matter. Such an object is not meant to linger once the curse is broken. If it remains, then perhaps the river has not finished its work." The fire hissed as if in agreement, and Mama yet unclosed her eyes, whispering an old proverb. The river that gives life also swallows life, and it never forgets what it has tasted. Benny's heart tightened, for though she had returned to her people, she realized she might never truly belong again. The villagers outside were already whispering that she was marked by the spirits, and she saw in the elder's eyes not only respect but fear, as though she had become something both sacred and dangerous. The council ended with a decision to call for the diviner at dawn, to read the will of the river through cowries and smoke. But as Benny left the hut, leaning on her staff, she felt the faintest ripple of laughter in the night breeze, a whisper that did not belong to Impostor, but to something deeper, older, still watching. She tightened her grip on the comb and prayed silently that her choice had not awakened a force more dangerous than the one she had destroyed. And when dawn broke, a thick mist still clung to the earth as if the river itself had risen to watch. And the villagers gathered in the sacred clearing where the diviner, Baba Ifajimi, had already laid out his instruments upon a woven mat of raffia cowrie shells, carved gourds filled with river sand, and a calabash of palm wine for the ancestors. Benny was led to sit at the center, her aged hands trembling as she clutched the cursed comb, while the people watched in tense silence, the children peering from behind their mothers' wrappers, afraid yet unable to look away. Baba Ifajimi, tall and gaunt with white chalk streaking his ebony skin, raised a staff crowned with feathers and beads, his deep voice rising into a chant that rolled like thunder across the mist, summoning the spirits of the river and the ancestors to speak. Through the shells, he cast the cowries upon the mat, and as they clattered, the hush of the forest deepened until even the birds seemed to hold their breath. The shells landed in a strange pattern that made Baba Ifajimi's brow crease, his eyes narrowing as he leaned close, his fingers tracing the shapes as though they burned. The villagers exchanged nervous glances, for the diviner was rarely unsettled. He looked up at Benny, his voice low and grave. The curse was not ended, it was shifted. The river has accepted the years you carry, but its hunger is not quenched. There is another hand still reaching, another spirit that has claimed you. A murmur rippled through the crowd, and Benny felt the comb grow hot in her lap, pulsing faintly like a heartbeat. She whispered that she had heard laughter in the wind, and at this, Baba Ifajimi closed his eyes, sprinkling river sand around her as he poured libation onto the earth, the liquid vanishing into the soil like a thirsty mouth drinking. Suddenly, the mist thickened, curling into shapes, faces, some kind and familiar, others twisted and dark, and the villagers gasped as a woman's figure flickered in the haze, tall and regal, with eyes like molten amber. Baba Ifajimi struck his staff against the ground, shouting, "Name yourself, spirit." But the figure only smiled, her voice like the hiss of rushing water. "The debt is not yet paid." Then she was gone, the mist collapsing into the earth with a hiss, leaving the clearing trembling in silence. The diviner fell back, sweat glistening on his brow. It is the river's first mother, Oshunmer's shadow. She has not been seen for generations. Benny, you are bound to her now. The villagers recoiled in fear, for to be tied to Oshunmer's shadow meant a destiny neither fully human nor fully spirit, a path of sacrifice that no mortal had walked in living memory. Benny lowered her gaze, her heart pounding, and though fear gnawed at her, a strange calm settled in her chest, for she knew her fight was far from over, and her choices would shape the fate of her entire people. After the diviner's revelation, the air of the village grew heavier, as if every breath carried the weight of unseen eyes. And Benny felt a strange pull in her chest that grew stronger with each passing hour, tugging her toward the river where the mist had first spoken. She tried to ignore it, clutching the cursed comb close. But the whisper of Oshunmer's shadow echoed inside her, a soft and alluring murmur that made her limbs weak. Whenever she resisted, and even her sleep was filled with dreams of water that stretched into eternity, filled with faces she did not know yet somehow recognized. The elders called for counsel again, but this time the people did not gather with eager ears. Instead, they lingered at a distance, some refusing to meet Ebony's gaze, their fear of the spirit's claim on her making them whisper that she was no longer one of them. Baba Ifejimi told her that the shadow's pull was a summons, a demand for her to present herself at the river before the next full moon, or risk the entire village being drowned by the anger of the waters. Mama Yetund, her old voice quivering, pressed a carved amulet of cowries and bronze into Ebony's palm, saying, "This may not protect you from the shadow, but it will remind you that we have not abandoned you." Still, Ebony saw the doubt in her eyes. That night, unable to bear the pressure in her chest, she walked to the river bank alone, the moon high and silver, its reflection rippling like a restless spirit across the dark waters. As she approached, the cursed comb throbbed in her hand, and the surface of the river began to shift, forming circles as if something beneath stirred. She knelt at the edge, the whispers now louder, speaking in a language she had never learned but understood perfectly. Promises of power, of freedom from age and frailty, of a place beyond the reach of human sorrow, but laced with the threat of losing herself entirely. Her reflection in the water trembled, then shifted, her face melting into that of another woman, beautiful, ageless, with eyes of molten amber. The same figure from the mist. The reflection smiled, though Ebony's lips did not move, and the voice came from the water itself. "Daughter of the comb, bearer of the debt, the river calls you. Come willingly, and your people will live. Resist, and they will drown." Ebony's heart thundered, her eyes stinging with tears, for she knew this was a trial no one had prepared her for, a path she would have to walk alone. And as the wind rustled through the tall reeds, carrying the faint sound of drums from the village, she whispered a prayer to the ancestors, asking for strength to face what awaited her in the depths of Oshunmer's shadow. As the silver glow of the moon deepened, Ebony felt the river pulling at her spirit more fiercely than ever. And though every instinct screamed to turn back, her feet moved of their own accord, stepping into the cool, swirling water until it lapped around her ankles, then her knees, each step accompanied by the soft hiss of voices rising from the depths. The cursed comb pulsed with heat in her hand, the carvings on its spine glowing faintly as if alive. And when she lifted it above the water, the reflection of the strange woman shimmered brighter, her amber eyes locking onto Ebony's with a power that pierced her soul. "You cannot flee your blood," the voice whispered, though the woman's lips never moved. "For your grandmother bound you to me long before you drew breath." The words struck like a spear, and suddenly Ebony saw visions of her grandmother, young and radiant, standing in this very river, combing her hair with the same cursed comb, while a shadowy figure behind her absorbed the years of life stolen from unborn generations. Tears blurred Ebony's sight, the betrayal of her bloodline burning her heart. But before she could cry out, the river surged upward, and she was pulled beneath the surface. The water was not cold but strangely warm, filled with golden lights that flickered like fireflies. And as she opened her eyes, she found herself no longer drowning but breathing as if the river had become air. Around her stretched a vast world of shimmering currents and towering figures of water shaped like ancestors, their faces grave and sorrowful. And at the center stood the woman of the reflection, her body woven from liquid light, her hair flowing like braided streams. "You are mine," the spirit declared, her voice echoing in Ebony's chest. "But you may yet bargain for your people." Ebony clutched the comb, feeling the blood of her grandmother coursing through it, and asked with trembling courage, "What must I give?" The spirit's smile widened, sharp as a blade, and the river quaked around them as she answered, "Your face, your name, your place among the living. Only then shall your people see another sunrise." Ebony's breath caught, for the price was more than death, it was erasure, to walk unseen, replaced by the spirit who would wear her face and take her life. Yet the echo of drums from above reached her even here, faint but steady, and she thought of Baba Ifejimi, Mama Yetund, and the children who would not live to see womanhood if she refused. With a steadying breath, she whispered a vow to the ancestors that she would not let her people be lost, even if it meant surrendering herself. The spirit's eyes glowed brighter, and the currents began to wrap around Ebony, tightening like invisible hands as the bargain sealed itself in the depths of the river. As the currents coiled around Ebony, she felt her body beginning to unravel, as though the river itself sought to strip her apart and weave her into something new. Her skin tingling, her bones trembling, her breath stolen with every passing second. And before her, the water spirit stretched out her hands, each finger glimmering like sharpened spears of light. Ebony clutched the cursed comb desperately, its carvings burning into her palm. And with each pulse of heat, memories of her life, her mother's lullabies, Baba Ifejimi's teachings, the laughter of her childhood friends, the smell of roasted plantains during market days flashed before her eyes as if bidding farewell. The spirit moved closer, her amber gaze soft yet merciless, and as she touched Ebony's cheek, Ebony gasped, for it felt like her own flesh had been claimed, pulled away from her soul and drawn into the spirit's form. She watched in horror, as her reflection in the shimmering currents shifted, the spirit's features slowly reshaping, her once fluid visage tightening into the very image of Ebony's own face. Every contour, every scar, every strand of hair replicated with terrifying precision. Ebony tried to cry out, but the river swallowed her voice, turning it into an echo that belonged not to her but to the stranger wearing her likeness. Panic surged within her chest as she realized the spirit was not merely borrowing her face but taking it, binding her to the realm of shadows while her body returned above to live among the unsuspecting villagers. The ancestors who loomed in the water seemed powerless, their expressions etched with sorrow, and Ebony understood then that this was the punishment of the cursed comb, a curse set in motion generations ago by her grandmother's selfishness. She felt herself growing lighter, as if her body no longer belonged to her, and her hands became translucent, fading into the currents while the spirit above solidified into her likeness. For a moment, the river stilled, and Ebony's heart pounded, with the dread that she was already gone. But a faint whisper curled through the depths, the voice of Mama Yetund, who even in her frailty had prayed for Ebony's protection. That whisper became a thread of strength, and though the spirit's possession was nearly complete, Ebony forced her fading hand to grip the comb tighter, the teeth digging into her skin until drops of blood swirled in the golden water like crimson smoke. The spirit hissed, startled by the resistance, but she did not release Ebony's face. Instead, she laughed, her voice echoing in cruel delight. "Fight if you wish, child, but every struggle binds you deeper." The river shuddered violently, and Ebony realized the true battle was only beginning, for the spirit might now wear her face, but the war for her soul had not yet been lost. As the river trembled from the spirit's mocking laughter, Ebony felt her blood mixing with the cursed comb, binding her pain into the water itself. And for the first time, she sensed a flicker of power that did not belong to the spirit. The voice of Mama Yetund grew clearer, like a drumbeat echoing through the depths, urging her to remember the old songs, the chants of the mothers before her, the ones who had once held dominion over rivers and shadows alike. Though her body was losing form, her spirit clung fiercely to the fragments of memory, and she began humming softly, the melody quivering against the currents. At first, it was faint, swallowed by the water, but then the ancestors' faces lit with recognition, their eyes glowing with fire as they began to hum along, their voices layering with hers until the entire river pulsed with the rhythm. The water spirit froze, her stolen face twitching with irritation, for the song was a thread the comb responded to, and the carvings in its body began to glow brighter, searing her grip. "Stop," the spirit hissed, her features flickering between her true self and Ebony's likeness. But Ebony only tightened her hold, feeling the pain anchor her to reality. The comb grew hotter, and the golden river darkened, as though the song dragged hidden truths from the depths. Suddenly, Ebony saw visions her grandmother, young and desperate, combing her hair before a mirror of obsidian, whispering pleas to stay beautiful, stealing the youth of her unborn children. She saw each descendant grow weaker, cursed to live in borrowed time, until the curse finally sought to claim Ebony. Tears burned her fading eyes, but she did not stop singing, for she knew now the spirit's power was not only in her face but in the silence of her victims. The river roared as the ancestors began to circle her, their chants growing louder, and the spirit shrieked, clutching her head as the stolen face warped again. Ebony pushed harder, the comb digging deeper into her palm, and though the pain was unbearable, she felt herself becoming solid once more, her outline sharpening against the currents. But just as hope sparked, the spirit's eyes blazed with fury, and she lunged forward, her mouth opening wide to inhale the last fragments of Ebony's soul. In that instant, Ebony cried out Mama Yetun's name, and a surge of blinding light erupted from the comb, throwing both of them apart. When the light dimmed, Ebony realized she was suspended between two worlds, half in the river, half above, while the spirit, still wearing her face, clawed desperately to pull her back. The battle was far from over, but for the first time, Ebony felt the ancestors fighting beside her, their chants shaking the waters with defiance. As the ancestral chants thundered louder in the river's belly, a tremor rippled through the earth above, sending shivers up the spines of the villagers who had gathered near the banks. The night sky, once jeweled with stars, became restless, clouds twisting into shapes that looked like faces watching silently. Elder Fadak, leaning heavily on her carved staff, whispered to the others that the battle of souls had begun, and that the child of Yetund was standing where none of them dared step. The villagers lit calabashes filled with palm oil, placing them carefully along the edge of the river to call upon the protection of Ogun and Asen, hoping their light would reach Ebony where the spirit fought to strip her of self. Beneath the surface, Ebony clung to the comb that burned with the force of 100 suns, her chants rising in defiance against the spirit who screamed in rage. For a moment, Ebony felt the weight of the villagers' prayers pressing down through the water, strengthening her. But the spirit was cunning, and with a voice like cracked iron, she spat venom into Ebony's mind, twisting the chants into whispers of doubt. "They do not pray for you," the spirit hissed, her stolen face grinning. "They pray for the curse to end, even if it means your death." Ebony's heart faltered, her voice stumbling, but the image of Mama Yetund appeared in the glow of the comb, her eyes filled with both sorrow and unyielding resolve. And she reminded Ebony, in a voice like rolling drums, that sacrifice had always been the seed of freedom. Gathering her will, A Benny pushed the spirit back with a surge of melody so sharp it split the waters like a blade, exposing for a heartbeat a corridor of light that reached toward the surface. She tried to swim upward, her lungs aching, but the spirit's claws clamped around her ankle, dragging her back into the depths with monstrous strength. The ancestors swirled faster, their chants now a war cry, and the comb pulsed, unleashing another flare of blinding light that forced the spirit to loosen her grip, but only slightly. Above, the villagers gasped as the river's surface boiled, the golden glow twisting into streaks of black, and Elder Fatic cried out for the drummers to beat harder. For rhythm was the bridge between the living and the spirits. The drums echoed through the night, each strike a thunderclap that carried into the depths where a Benny battled. And with each beat, her strength returned, her form brightening against the shadows. The spirit shrieked, her stolen face beginning to crack. But with one final desperate lunge, she wrapped herself around a Benny, forcing their forms to blur together until even the ancestors could not tell them apart. The river quaked as if the world itself held its breath, and the villagers fell silent, waiting to see who would emerge when the waters calmed. As the ancestral chants thundered louder in the river's belly, a tremor rippled through the earth above, sending shivers up the spines of the villagers who had gathered near the banks. The night sky, once jeweled with stars, became restless, clouds twisting into shapes that looked like faces watching silently. Elder Fatic, leaning heavily on her carved staff, whispered to the others that the battle of souls had begun, and that the child of Yetund was standing where none of them dared step. The villagers lit calabashes filled with palm oil, placing them carefully along the edge of the river to call upon the protection of Ogun and Asen, hoping their light would reach a Benny where the spirit fought to strip her of self. Beneath the surface, a Benny clung to the comb that burned with the force of 100 suns, her chants rising in defiance against the spirit who screamed in rage. For a moment, a Benny felt the weight of the villagers' prayers pressing down through the water, strengthening her. But the spirit was cunning, and with a voice like cracked iron, she spat venom into a Benny's mind, twisting the chants into whispers of doubt. "They do not pray for you," the spirit hissed, her stolen face grinning. "They pray for the curse to end, even if it means your death." A Benny's heart faltered, her voice stumbling, but the image of Mama Yetund appeared in the glow of the comb, her eyes filled with both sorrow and unyielding resolve. And she reminded a Benny in a voice like rolling drums that sacrifice had always been the seed of freedom. Gathering her will, a Benny pushed the spirit back with a surge of melody so sharp it split the waters like a blade, exposing for a heartbeat a corridor of light that reached toward the surface. She tried to swim upward, her lungs aching, but the spirit's claws clamped around her ankle, dragging her back into the depths with monstrous strength. The ancestors swirled faster, their chants now a war cry, and the comb pulsed, unleashing another flare of blinding light that forced the spirit to loosen her grip, but only slightly. Above, the villagers gasped as the river's surface boiled, the golden glow twisting into streaks of black, and Elder Fatic cried out for the drummers to beat harder. For rhythm was the bridge between the living and the spirits. The drums echoed through the night, each strike a thunderclap that carried into the depths where a Benny battled. And with each beat, her strength returned, her form brightening against the shadows. The spirit shrieked, her stolen face beginning to crack. But with one final desperate lunge, she wrapped herself around a Benny, forcing their forms to blur together until even the ancestors could not tell them apart. The river quaked as if the world itself held its breath, and the villagers fell silent, waiting to see who would emerge when the waters calmed. As the waters churned with the fury of unseen hands, Ebony felt her body dissolving into a storm of memories not her own, her spirit colliding with that of the stranger who wore her face. She saw flashes of her childhood, but twisted her laughter, stolen and placed in another girl's throat. Her mother's embrace given to a shadow that looked like her but was not. The spirit clung tightly, whispering lies and truths woven together, telling Ebony that the world had never wanted her, that even her mother's love had been borrowed. The comb between them throbbed like a beating heart, struggling to choose which soul it would serve. And for an instant, Ebony feared that it would betray her as it had betrayed generations before. Yet the echoes of the drums above broke through. The spirit's illusions, the pounding rhythms of the Dundon and Bada reminding her that she was not alone, that her people had not abandoned her. She cried out into the depths, her voice fusing with the drumbeats, and the waters around her exploded into light. The ancestors, their forms swirling in cloaks of fire and mist, surged closer, their chants piercing through the spirit's lies. The stranger recoiled, her stolen face now cracking further, revealing beneath it a hollow visage that shifted like smoke. In a last act of defiance, the spirit lunged at Ebony, trying to force herself fully into Ebony's body, to walk the earth once more in flesh that was not hers. Pain tore through Ebony's chest as their souls wrestled, and her vision blurred until she could no longer see the riverbed or the glowing ancestors. Only an endless void of dark water. Then Mama Yetun's voice rose again, steady and unyielding, telling her granddaughter that courage was not in holding onto life, but in refusing to let fear decide who she was. Ebony's tears mingled with the river, and with a scream that seemed to tear the heavens themselves, she forced the comb to blaze with all her remaining strength. Light roared through the depths, searing the spirit's form into ash. But even as the stranger dissolved, she whispered curses of return, promising that the face she had stolen would never truly belong to Ebony. The river calmed suddenly, the storm silenced, and Ebony felt herself rising as though carried by unseen hands. When she broke the surface, the villagers gasped in awe and fear, for her eyes glowed with the fire of the ancestors, and though it was Ebony's face, a trace of the stranger's shadow lingered faintly at the corners of her smile. As Ebony stumbled onto the riverbank, the villagers drew back, their eyes wide with awe and unease. For though her form was her own, a whisper of otherness clung to her, a shadow that seemed to move when she stood still. Mama Yetun's cane struck the earth thrice, commanding silence, and the drums ceased, leaving only the sound of the river's gentle lapping and the crackle of the torches. The old woman's gaze was stern yet sorrowful as she reached out a trembling hand, touching her granddaughter's wet cheek as though testing whether she was flesh or spirit. Ebony collapsed into her arms, exhausted, her heart racing with the echo of the stranger's final curse. She tried to speak, but her throat yielded only a rasp. So Mama Yetun lifted her face toward the sky, calling on the ancestors to bear witness to the girl's return. The villagers began to chant, but the words stumbled, for some whispered that the spirit had not been fully banished, that they had seen the shadow smile when Ebony had risen. The Oba himself, flanked by his chiefs, stepped forward, his beaded crown glinting in the firelight, and declared that the girl would be taken to the shrine of Orunmila at dawn, where the priests could divine if her spirit was whole. The crowd murmured, torn between relief and suspicion, mothers clutching their children as though fearing the darkness might leap from Ebony's skin. That night, she was taken to the sacred hut and laid on a mat woven with charms of palm fronds and cowrie shells. Mama Yetun sat beside her, humming a lullaby older than memory. while the villagers kept vigil outside, some praying for her soul, others muttering that the comb had tainted her blood beyond repair. In the stillness, Benny dreamed of the river again, but this time she stood on its bank alone, staring into waters that showed her reflection shifting between herself and the stranger, their faces flickering as though bound by an invisible thread. When she awoke in the dim light of dawn, the fire in the hut had burned low, and Mama Yetund was asleep beside her. But in the corner of the room, she thought she saw a figure watching her own likeness, standing in silence before dissolving into mist. Benny's chest tightened with fear, yet she remained still, afraid to wake her grandmother, for deep down she knew the battle had not ended. It had only changed its form. Outside, the priest's chants began to rise, calling her to the shrine, and with every beat of the drum, she felt the shadow stir within her, waiting. The air was heavy with incense as the sun rose over W. Runcla's shrine. Benny was led barefoot across the courtyard, the red earth cool beneath her feet, her arms trembling as if they bore the weight of invisible chains. The priests, draped in white wrappers streaked with sacred chalk, circled her, chanting verses that braided Yoruba and Igbo incantations, their voices deep and rhythmic, like waves striking stone. Mama Yetund followed close behind, leaning on her staff, whispering prayers beneath her breath, while the Oba and his chiefs watched from a carved wooden platform, their faces grave. The shrine loomed ahead, its thatched roof crowned with cowrie shells and iron charms that glittered in the light. Drums beat slowly, echoing Benny's heartbeat, and as she stepped onto the threshold, the air thickened. She swore she felt fingers brush her skin, though no one touched her. Inside, the room was dim, lit by clay lamps that cast shadows writhing across the mud walls. At the center stood a great carved figure of W. Runcla, its eyes inlaid with brass, watching as though alive. The high priest, Baba Tanimu, raised his staff of opal beads and commanded Benny to kneel. "Child," he intoned, his voice rough as dry leaves, "the river has returned you. But tell us, are you whole? Or do you still carry the shadow?" Benny's lips parted, but before she could answer, a cold laugh rippled through the air. It was her voice, yet not hers. The villagers outside gasped as the lamps flickered wildly, their flames bending toward her like reeds before a storm. Suddenly, Benny felt her limbs jerk, her own body straining against her will. Her fingers clawed the earth, and her eyes burned with a strange fire. Mama Yetund cried out, clutching her staff, while the priest surged forward, chanting louder, splashing consecrated water from calabashes around her. Benny tried to scream, but the stranger within her only smiled through her lips, whispering, "This body is mine." The drums quickened, frantic now, as Baba Tanimu sprinkled chalk symbols across her forehead and chest. He called on the ancestors, invoking names long buried, his voice thunderous. Benny felt herself sinking, as though dragged into a dark river again. But deep inside, she clung to her grandmother's lullaby still echoing in her mind. With the last strength of her spirit, she whispered her mother's name, and the shrine shuddered as though the earth itself had heard. A great wind burst through the hut, extinguishing the lamps. Villagers outside screamed, some falling to the ground in fear. In the darkness, Benny felt a tearing inside her chest, as if the shadow was being ripped away. When the lamps flickered back to life, she collapsed onto the mat, gasping, her body drenched in sweat. The room was silent save for the sound of her breathing. Baba Tanimu's eyes burned into her. "The battle is not finished," he said gravely, "but the ancestors have heard you. Now, child, you must choose whether to fight or surrender." The shrine was still trembling when Ebony rose slowly from the mat, her breath shallow but steady. A hush spread through the courtyard. Even the rustling leaves seemed to pause, waiting. Her body felt lighter, though her spirit still ached as though torn by claws. Baba Tanimu's staff glowed faintly in the firelight, his eyes locked on hers. "The ancestors have opened the path," he said. "But it is you, Ebony, who must walk it." Ebony glanced at Mama Yetund, who stood just beyond the circle of priests. The old woman's face was wet with tears, but her eyes gleamed with fierce pride. "You are not alone," Mama Yetund whispered, clutching her staff. "Our blood runs with you. Our spirits stand behind you." The Oba stepped forward, lifting his staff of authority high. "This land does not bow to shadows," he declared. "Fight, daughter, and take back what was stolen." The stranger's laughter rose again, a low hiss in Ebony's chest. But this time, she did not tremble. Instead, she drew in a deep breath and closed her eyes. She remembered the river, the cold grip pulling her under, and then her mother's voice, soft and steady, guiding her home. She planted her hands firmly on the earth and spoke, her voice trembling but resolute. "This body is mine. My face is mine. My spirit is mine. Leave and return to the darkness." The air thickened, and a black mist swirled from her skin, writhing and screeching, the form of the stranger struggling to hold shape. The villagers gasped as the figure emerged, fully a twisted reflection of Ebony, her face warped, her eyes burning with malice. The stranger lunged, but the priests formed a barrier, their chants like a wall of fire. Baba Tanimu struck his staff on the ground, and lightning seemed to spark across the shrine floor. Ebony stood, her legs shaking but unyielding. She faced the shadow version of herself, and with a voice clear as the village drum, she cried, "You will not wear me again." She reached out, not with her hands but with her spirit, and pushed. The shadow shrieked, splintering into shards of black smoke that dissolved into the air. Silence fell. The drums stopped. Only the sound of the river nearby carried through the night. Ebony collapsed into Mama Yetund's arms, her grandmother rocking her gently like a child. The Oba lowered his staff, his voice trembling with awe. "The ancestors have spoken. The true daughter has returned." Villagers rushed forward, some weeping, some kneeling in thanks, their voices rising in songs of praise. Ebony, though exhausted, smiled faintly. She was free. The stranger was gone. She had reclaimed her face and her place. That night, under the glow of countless stars, the village feasted not only in celebration but in remembrance, knowing that darkness could wear even the most familiar face, but light if clung to with courage would always endure.